politicians who want to get elected and union representative of the workers that want, income and retirement. But you have this cap over what the county can spend every year called Prop 13 because it limits the revenues. So what happened? It's just predictable. It's like Wimpy, the old cartoon character. I will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today.
That's really, on your site, isn't it? That cartoon?
There's the front cover of my report.
That's where I saw it.
I think, is the problem. I think that's the problem. I think that...
but now, isn't the federal government in that exact same problem?
Yeah.
And in fact...
and the state government.
And every other county and most cities. And
I've actually talked to a couple of people because we've met in the past, and I brought your concerns to actually a former supervisor, and he said, well, this whole business of 85% of our county debt being basically deferred retiree obligations, he says that's not much different than the Social Security system, how the Social Security system works. Would you agree?
I think you and I probably both have real concerns about the kind of debt that's been built up in this country that has not been funded.
Yes.
It's the bills are going to come due.
Yes. And
so that's what's happened in this county. It's easy for county officials to make a promise to employees that doesn't have to be kept for 20 years because they're not going to be the ones that are going to have to make it happen.
Right.
It's easy for union officials to go back to their members and say, hey, look at me, I brought home the bacon. Look at this great retirement benefit you're going to have, even though that bacon doesn't have to show up for 20 years. It's somebody else's problem.
Right.
And the problem we have in this county now is the bills are coming due.
All right, so by what mechanism, explain to our listeners how if 85% of a
15 million or so.
If 85% of a $315 million debt is retiree benefits, explain to our listeners how that debt is deferred 20 years out into the future.
Well, let me give you a very simplistic example that I think gets the point across. Let's say, Jay, I want you to come to work for me on January 1st next year, on 09, and work through December 31st, and I'll pay you $50,000 that year. And on January 1st of the next year, I'll pay you $1 million. What's my expense next year? Is it just $50,000? Or does that expense include the $1 million promise that I made?
You just take that million and put it in a different set of books. See, that's how you do it.
Well, it used to be, when Prop 13 passed, the way government accounting worked is they did not have to consider that retirement, that pension payment, an expense until they paid it. But the problem with that is it's really earned while the people work for the county. There's over the last 10 years, there's been a pretty big reform of government accounting standards, and this is what you were talking about a little while ago. There's a group called the Government Accounting Standards Board. They set the accounting rules for public entities in the United States. And I want to read this. This will be the most academic I get, I promise. This is from the plain language description of retiree benefit accounting by the Government Accounting Standard Boards. And what they say is pension benefits and other retirement benefits like health care are part of the compensation that employees earn each year, even though those benefits are not received until after employment has ended. Therefore, the cost of those future benefits is a part of the cost of providing those services today. But most governments do not report long-term financial obligations related to these benefits. Consequently, the readers of financial statements, including the public, don't have the information with which to assess the cost of public services today and to analyze the long-run financial health of their government. Very basic statement. Retirement benefits are always earned while a person is working. The expense always happens when the person's working, not when the benefit is paid.
So what number do you choose then?
Well, the problem is there's two kinds of, in very general terms, there's two kinds of these types of programs: guaranteed benefits and guaranteed contributions. Most of the private sector now does, and I'm not making any value judgments. What I'm going to describe is the problem exactly with what you just brought up.
Or otherwise
what's the number?
Otherwise known as defined contributions versus defined benefits, right?
Most in the private sector now, 401ks, IRAs, the deal is you work for me after 30 years in a defined contribution. Every year I'll put 5% of your salary into a retirement fund that will be your retirement fund. Now when you leave, I've fulfilled my responsibility as an employer, and you now have that retirement fund. Good luck. That's the deal. In a defined benefit or guaranteed benefit program, you work for me for 20 years, for 30 years, and then I'll pay you X amount per month with a formula for as long as you may live. If you live another 100 years, every month you're going to get that check. Well, the problem is, how do you know how much that's going to be? How do you know if it's true that the real expense of that promise has to be reported while you're working? How do you know what that number is? Well, that's why actuaries exist.
I was about to say that's why our retirement board hires an actuary to help plot those obligations over a timeline.
You know what actuaries are? Those are guys who found accounting too exciting.
Now, those are two jokes in one show on one of the driest subjects. So I want to tell our listeners we don't try.